Today we are delighted to meet William Cotter from Net Affinity, who's joining us today to give some insights from the direct booking area of industry into what Brexit might mean to the Irish tourism industry. So we're looking at generally what Brexit, what it means, first of all, generally, in general sense, and then more specifically, what impact that might have on both the industry at large and obviously Irish hoteliers, the hotel industry, and what sort of things, from your perspective in Net Affinity, can help in terms of give advice to businesses what they should start planning for, start doing. So over to you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Stephen, for inviting me along this afternoon, and certainly doing the research for our webinar. It's been very interesting, just stopping for a period and thinking about Brexit and okay, what does it mean? What are the implications of it? Let's say for us as an industry and for all of us, certainly in terms of our businesses. And it's certainly a very interesting period, both from a historic point of view, both politically, economically, and socially. And certainly when we look back on it in time, we'll find to say, this has been quite a remarkable change, a significant change, a seismic shift in terms of what's happening to our society as such. But there's definitely challenges there, and certainly from an Irish perspective, that there's huge challenges there for us. Having said that, challenges are good and challenges make us stronger. But I think the main thing is to, as I say, certainly to stop, pause, think about it and say, what are the implications of this and how do we respond and so forth. So what we'd like to do today is take you on a journey. And pretty much, let's say, what I'd like to do is just explain what Brexit is and what does it mean in practice for us. How will it affect my business primarily? How do I adapt to it, and what will the future look like as we understand it? And I hope by the end of the session that we will be better informed and better equipped in terms of how we can move forward. So just if I step back a little bit and just say, okay, well, what is Brexit? And when did this start? And what is the likely timescale for it? And it's not actually that long ago. It was June 2016 when the UK public voted in favour to leave the EU. And the main reasons and motivation for it were around things like immigration, their independence and return of full sovereignty. And it was March of this year that the UK triggered the Article 50 to start the process to leave the EU. And pretty much from that period, the UK has 2 years to get their I suppose, house in order, to agree the terms of their exit. So by the time, say by April of 2016, the UK technically will have left the EU, but most definitely there will be a hangover in terms of trade, legal, and a lot of, let's say, infrastructural I suppose, items that need to be addressed. And certainly from our European perspective, this is a survey from Pew Research, and just went right across Europe and looking at some of the key markets and saying, well, what is their perception of Brexit? Do they see it as a good thing or a bad thing? We can certainly see from let's say, the heart of Europe, the likes of Germany and Netherlands, Spain and so forth, definitely see it as a very bad thing for both the UK. Certainly in the UK themselves, they're fairly evenly split. It's a slight majority in favour, and saying that 48% viewed it as a bad thing. But as a general rule, the consensus is it's not necessarily a good thing for the UK, certainly in the short term. And immediately for the period after the vote in 2016 took place, the UK economy continued to do well. There was a strong growth in their GDP and employment, and low inflation persisted. There was quite a long period of low inflation. And in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, the sterling started to weaken. And there was very positive benefits for the UK economy in terms of its competitiveness, and it certainly made it more attractive, or let's say certainly perceived better value for overseas visitors. But also the corollary of that is true in the sense that, say, for UK visitors, whether they're going into mainland Europe or into the Irish market, it just makes those trips that bit more expensive for them. And certainly we're seeing the emerging reality now where, let's say, that weakening sterling is increasing the cost of imports for UK manufacturing, and that's definitely feeding into, let's say, consumer prices. Excuse me. And we're seeing rising inflation. which is having a knock-on effect in terms of consumer spending in the UK.
Yeah.
And the consensus at the moment is that, say, up until, say, summer of this year, the UK economy was doing quite well. But of late, there's definitely strong signs that the economy is starting to shift. Things like, say, softening of the property market, particularly at the top end of the market. The mortgage approval rate is at an 18-month low and is looking like to continue for a while. And this whole uncertainty is definitely curtailing investment, both within the UK and externally in terms of foreign direct investment, and that's having a knock-on effect on employment.
So in terms of, from an Irish tourism perspective, what do you feel are the key implications for Ireland?
Yeah, I think the key implications is definitely around visitor numbers coming into Ireland, and I suppose that perceived value of Ireland vis-a-vis the other destinations, and we'll touch on that in a few minutes. And certainly, let's say there's a slowdown in the economy in the UK is definitely becoming more likely. And from an Irish perspective, Brexit is definitely a major headache for us. We do a huge amount of business with the UK. It's around 35% of our GDP. More specifically, for our indigenous firms, around 43% of their exports go to the UK, and any shift in sterling has a big impact on their profitability, and that has a knock-on effect then on things like their ability to reinvest in their business and to hire additional people. And any effect, historically, any negative effect that's happening in the UK economy tends to have a knock-on effect on the Irish economy because of those close economic ties. And if the UK, when they leave the EU, it will, certainly from an Irish political perspective, we will lose quite a major important ally, and we have been very close with the UK, particularly of late, over the last several years. And I suppose the biggest issue and the biggest debate right now is around this border, where the border between Ireland and the north becomes that external EU land border. And that's becoming sort of, I suppose, a contentious issue right now. And certainly from a Northern Ireland perspective, Brexit is also a major headache for them in the sense that any changes that are happening within the UK, and again, let's say the exit from the EU, the likely effect that it will stifle the Northern Ireland economy. Again, just revisiting that point in terms of, let's say, Northern Ireland being that external land border between the EU and UK, and it's a real headache in terms of how will this actually work in practice. But equally for the Northern Ireland businesses, the EU is a huge market for a lot of manufacturing in the north, and again, there's implications for them in terms of, again, sterling versus EU, but also then just how do they, let's say things like VAT, legislation and so forth in terms of doing business. And long-term impact, any impact on the UK economy, again, will have a knock-on effect on the Northern Irish economy. And we're definitely seeing, huge impact on the whole sort of cross-border side of things. There's a lot of cross-border business going on, and just anecdotally things like, say, weddings, heading, from weddings that traditionally would have happened, say, in the south, heading north to the counties around the northern side of the border. So really, right now, the story is around sterling, and the biggest impact that these changes that we're seeing on sterling is having a big impact on tourism. And let's say over the last year and a half, as sterling continued to weaken, it is slowly making the Irish market that bit more expensive from a UK perspective. And we're certainly seeing evidence of a decline in the perception of value for money in terms of the Irish market vis-a-vis, let's say, other destinations. And there's hard facts to support this, both data that's coming out of, say, Fáilte Ireland, but also stats that we're seeing ourselves, where, let's say, visitors to Ireland generally are down, let's say, year to date around 6%. The north down 6% in terms of overall visitors, and holiday makers specifically down around 9%. And this has a huge knock-on impact in terms of you've less visitors coming in, there's less revenue that's being generated, but equally then has a knock-on effect then in terms of employment. And as we know, let's say tourism is a huge employer, both north and south. Equally, the weakening sterling is making the UK an inexpensive destination in itself, certainly in the short term anyway, and UK right now is around 20% cheaper than what it was 3 years ago. And you've got, again, anecdotal evidence that markets like, say, the German market shifting their business or shifting their trips to, say, the UK, Scotland instead of Ireland, And again, Dublin as an example, just within the last 12 months is around 20% more expensive than a year ago. And I suppose there's two factors that are driving that. One is around the fact that, say, the Dublin hotels are pushing rate that bit more, and they're up around 10% than they were 12 months ago. But equally, let's say the shift in sterling has dropped around 10% in that period, so now Dublin is, let's say, around 20% more expensive. And again, that's just has a knock-on effect in terms of its attractiveness from a UK perspective. Yeah.
In terms of the Irish hoteliers specifically, I mean, how are they being impacted at the moment, and maybe how can you sort of put a crystal ball in a sense of how do you think they will be impacted more so in the future as this develops?
Yeah, again, there's quite a bit of work being done on this at the moment, and the IHF themselves conducted quite a detailed survey in quarter one of this year, and there's a very strong evidence and very strong message coming back from Irish hoteliers, where they're saying around, say, 9 out of 10 hoteliers were saying that Brexit was a significant concern for them first and foremost. But more specifically, around 4 in 10 were seeing a drop in advance bookings from the UK. Having said that, let's say the Irish economy and the hotels in Ireland generally are seeing, I suppose, still quite an uplift in business going on, and part of that has been driven both, say, from the domestic market, but also, let's say, the North American market and mainland Europe, and that's kind of, how would I say, leveling out or dampening the, let's say, the impact that the UK is having on the Irish market. And again, Dublin is tend to be faring a little bit better because of the product mix, in the sense that it's a good business destination, but it's also a very strong leisure destination. So it's not suffering quite as much as, again, let's say, as the border counties, which are very dependent on the domestic, let's say, domestic, both north and south.
As you say, that the key areas, I think that the Dublin and some of the honey spots, if you like, they're benefiting from, I suppose, compensation from the US particularly at the moment, some other European countries, which is helping. But that's not going to last, possibly.
No. Yeah, and I suppose I'd say the US market, again, is very fickle. You know, as we know, historically, they're not great travellers. But certainly at the moment, they are travelling. And when they do travel, they spend well and stay longer. So there's a good knock-on effect, certainly for the destinations that they're staying in. I mean, they will definitely benefit from it. But yeah, certainly for the border counties, I suppose here's a couple of stats, let's say, we're seeing ourselves. So what this chart is looking at is, let's say, the border counties in terms of the shift in business and business coming from Northern Ireland specifically. So we're seeing just generally an 8% drop in arrivals, or let's say the volume of bookings, 9% in value terms. And the counties that are being hit the most would be the likes of Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim, as well as Cavan. So definitely, I suppose, a shift, and it is closely related to just that shift in sterling. And I suppose, in some sense, this is nothing new. We've had this, this swing in currency, several times over the years. And I suppose, when it's in the euro's favour, Ireland benefit that bit more, and when it's in sterling's favour, well, then say the north benefits a little bit more. But certainly, it's the most immediate impact that we're seeing because of that shift in sterling. But equally, this chart is looking at visitors coming into the border counties. Again, let's say visitors external to, let's say, Ireland in terms of booking into let's say, those border counties. And certainly for the UK, both in terms of volume and value, it's around down 12% in volume terms and down 14% in revenue terms. Ireland, in percentage terms, the bookings into border counties are that bit higher, but maybe just, as I say, it's from percentage terms, it just looks that little bit healthier. Definitely a very strong volume of bookings coming in from North America, let's say the US and Canada. Having said that, it's coming from quite a small base. And certainly in terms of, say, response to Brexit and Fáilte Ireland have been doing the Get Brexit Ready seminars and roadshow, and that has been very effective in terms of generating awareness on a national level. And the key message coming out of that roadshow is around getting the basics right. And the basics right in terms of how you do your business, and it has to be around, let's say, service quality and reputation. And I suppose that message always has to be there, both during good times and bad times. If you always, I guess, focus in on what your business is about and looking after your guests, looking after your business, well then chances are that you are better prepared to deal with the upswings and downturns. And that really has to be the core message. There's no secret solution or formula for all of this. There's no silver bullet. It's about, I say, looking after the business, making sure the business is being run well, and that you're competitive relative to your comp set, but also relative to other markets. And again, we are at risk, and say certainly in the Dublin market, where we may be pushing that a little bit too much, and then that again is having a knock-on effect in terms of that perceived value. And again, let's say from Fáilte Ireland's perspective, again a huge emphasis on the training and staff and retention of staff and so forth. And again, if you hire good people, train them to do their work and look after them as best you possibly can, well then again that has a knock-on effect on your service and your business. Again, there's a shift in spend into the Northern Ireland regions from Fáilte Ireland. And again, I suppose this is probably are more knowledgeable in this than I, but certainly there's an increase around 24 million in funding for tourism marketing, and around 10 million of that is being spent in 2017. But I certainly believe that as an industry we definitely need to be doing more. We need to be differentiating better. We need to be more interesting vis-a-vis our main competitors. And again, the whole perceived around the value side of things, how can we present better value to our customers? And even if we can't do anything about the fluctuations in sterling, and say, is there a value add that we can give to the guests that are coming in and then staying with us?
So in terms of against the backdrop, or you mentioned there, how can hotels in Ireland still manage to grow direct bookings?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I suppose if we look at let's say where are we at right now, and it's sometimes we just lose sight of the importance of, say, the three markets in terms of Ireland, UK, and North America. Those three markets together represent around 94% of all bookings coming into Irish hotels, both north and south. And the bulk of that business is Ireland, UK, the US, depending on the hotel. On average, it's between 4 and 5%. Now, some hotels might be getting 8 or 9% of their business from the US market, but on average, it's around, say, between 4 and 5%. So it's relatively small in the overall scheme of things. Having said that, there is definitely opportunity to develop that business. And the reason being is the North American market is very buoyant at the moment. They're in a good mood. The economy is strong, inflation is low, and there's good growth rate and low unemployment. So there's certainly a good feel good factor there. And from an Irish perspective, from an Irish business perspective, it is quite easy to do business with the US in the sense that we have a lot of similarity in terms of language, legislation, but also there's a very strong cultural connection between Ireland and the US. And we have a lot to offer to the US market in terms of the history and the heritage that exists in Ireland, again, both north and south. Long term, again, there's definitely opportunity to develop business with mainland Europe, and we certainly have seen some very nice increases coming from specific markets, and particularly, let's say, the Scandinavian market. But long term, China is really a long term play, and I know Fáilte Ireland have been doing a lot of work trying to get, let's say, whether piggyback is the right word as such, but to capitalize on the huge volume of Chinese tourists going into the UK and trying to extend that into the Irish market. Again, I suppose, with mainland Europe and, say, the Chinese market, you've got things like languages. It just becomes a little bit more complicated from a marketing point of view, and things like cultural, particularly, let's say, with Chinese tourists. Again, just there may well be a need for quite a broad educational program. I suppose just to highlight the cultural aspects of, let's say, the Chinese tourist. Yeah.
Well, that's underway, as I say, with the China Ready project, but it's seen as being a huge potential market for the future. And ironically, the cultural changes aren't that significant in terms of they're very subtle, very small, but things, and often quite low cost. So it's not a huge barrier as people might initially perceive. But as you say, it's a long game. It's not going to happen overnight.
So certainly from a hotel's perspective, and I suppose I would always advocate for people before they move forward, they almost need to take a step back a little bit. And really taking a step back from the perspective of just pausing, looking at your business and saying, okay, what is going on in my business right now? Where is my business coming from? Where are my bookings coming from? And how are they booking? And there's a huge amount of data available to hotels, both through, say, the likes of Google Analytics, which gives a huge amount of data on who your visitors are, where they're coming from, the age profile, the demographics, time of booking, and so forth. And the same from your booking engine provider, looking at the data that's available to you. And again, you've got information on, say, the source of booking, the length of time the booking path is in terms of, let's say, how long ahead are they looking to book and so forth. So it's really about stopping for a second, pausing and saying, okay, where is this business coming from? Why are they booking with us? If your hotel is hugely dependent on the domestic market, who is that domestic market? What is the age profile? What is the demographics, the gender split? And saying, okay, how do we develop our business further? And I suppose once you have that situation analysis, and say, okay, now we can move forward a little bit. Yeah. And we would certainly encourage hotels to what we call, let's say, build personas of their core target audience, and say, well, who's your core business provider into your hotel, and then what's your secondary and tertiary markets, and build personas then, so that you have a pretty good idea in terms of who those guests are. Equally, a lot of hotels are getting quite a large volume of bookings from their OTAs, and again, it's you can delve into that data and say, okay, where's this business coming from? Does it mirror or replicate what's going on in your own website? But also, are they delivering in business from markets that you're not getting from? Is it further afield? And it's like, is there an opportunity there that you can explore that a little bit further? I guess things around your website, we say, okay, making sure that it can sell to various markets, but in essence, really, this is around things like, say, languages and currency. Currency is a little bit more straightforward, and certainly from a lot of your major booking engine providers will have currency options built in. Languages can present a little bit more challenge in terms of just the work involved to localize your website for the market. So there's a time and cost element involved, and once you get it done, then it's looking after and maintaining it. So there's challenges around languages, and again, if you know that you get, say, obviously English is your core market, but if you get a lot of visitors in maybe from the German market or the Scandinavian market, well, then it might well be worth your while to translate your site in that language. The next point really is kind of a simple one, but quite an important one really, and it's around pricing in terms of, I suppose, two elements to it. One is just ensuring that there's consistency in your pricing strategy right across the board, so that the price that you sell your double room, that it's the same or better on your own site, but also consistent with how you're selling it on the OTAs. But equally, the second point, and what we would encourage hotels is to price on what we call, let's say, the total price rather than on a per person. And again, it's quite a small thing, but it's an important one. And where we find that, say, hotels shift their pricing strategy, instead of pricing on a per person, they price on a total room price. So say the price of this room is, say, 120 euros rather than on a per person. The conversion rate on a per room pricing is actually that bit higher, or by as much as 20%. So it's well worth doing. There's huge opportunity in around direct marketing, as in email marketing, as well as social and content marketing. And direct has to be, I suppose, the most cost-effective method that a hotel has available to it in terms of marketing. It's really about building a data set of your customers, obviously being compliant, we're keeping an eye on GDPR, but building your database and having a proactive strategy around that database acquisition, but being frequent in terms of the message that you're sending out, whether it's, let's say, on a fortnightly basis or a monthly basis. Again, it's in cost terms, it's probably, let's say, the cheapest method that is available to us in terms of marketing.
But at the end of the day, I suppose it's a balancing act between the different channels, whether it's primarily direct, some OTA, some group work, and so on. So you get a balance at the end of the day, rather than all your eggs in one basket.
Yes, yeah. And again, a lot of hotels would be actively engaged in paid online activity, and it's the beauty of paid activity is that it's a direct response activity, and if you spend €1,000, well, then you know exactly what you're getting in return. You know how much traffic you're getting, you know how many inquiries you're getting, you know how many bookings you're getting, and the exact cost of all of that. And again, we would strongly encourage hotels to be proactive, I guess, in terms of their online advertising spend, and certainly set it within parameters. And the beauty of it is that you can set parameters and say, okay, well, look, I want to spend €1,000, but I want this return on investment. I want my CPA to be whatever, 7% or 8%. And as long as you set those parameters, well, then, there's no reason why you should stop spending at 1,000 or 2,000. I would encourage hotels to keep spending as long as it's within the guidelines that you're comfortable with. Yeah. And again, that's the beauty of it, that you can do it. But equally, and again, if you're targeting, say, the US market, I mean, Bing is a very strong search channel within the US. And again, meta search, we're seeing great opportunity on the meta search side of things, particularly with the likes of Trivago and TripAdvisor. And again, with a lot of advertising, it's really important just to research your market in terms of which markets are you most interested in, where should your money be spent, where are you getting the best return, and if you're extending your reach beyond, say, the Irish and UK market, well, then just maybe I suppose dabble a little bit initially. And again, that's the beauty of the platform, that you can, if you want to target the US market, that you can pick certain cities and say, okay, look, I just want to target my campaigns in these markets. And again, it's being smart about it, is looking at and saying, okay, where's the there's good air connections, for example. I know that's if it's Boston, New York, LA, for example, and say, okay, well, let's just concentrate on those markets for our advertising campaign. And then if you're investing in your advertising, well, then it's I suppose being smart about it in terms of following it through, and so having things like like landing pages for that traffic, and it's just being aware of any sort of cultural or language differences, that you're just I suppose using, say, US
vernacular.
Vernacular, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And also, I think it's important that, as that think of it as experience. They don't just come to sleep in the hotel, they come for an experience. So what are they going to see and do in the locality? What can bring them in? What's the story behind it is very important. And a lot of work being done on that to make sure the website projects that story.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important, and really, I think it applies to every business, not just a hotel. I mean, it's every business. Say, what is our story? Why would somebody do business with us, for example? And I suppose the stronger that story is, the better it is. And I suppose if you have a property that has a strong heritage, well, then you can build on that story hugely. But equally, if you're in an area that has, again, a good heritage, or there's a lot happening in the area, excuse me, that it is a big draw in itself.
Absolutely.
And I think on a national level, we've been really, really good in terms of just looking at who we are as a country and say, how do we add value, and how do we make the most of what the resources that we have, and things like the Wild Atlantic Way and the Ancient East, and Cork area. They're doing the maritime activity, and I don't know. There's a huge potential for us to develop, and as I say, we've lots to offer, and sometimes we probably don't fully appreciate it or value it as much as we can. Yeah, I suppose other things, and sometimes these are kind of small things, but they're quite important in terms of just. Say the security of your site, so that your site is secure as much as you can, so that we're showing the HTTPS protocol from the time that the person lands on the site right through to the booking process. But also then taking advantage of things, some of the remarketing technology, so things like booking abandonment, retargeting, and things like urgency messaging. I suppose taking the best that we're seeing the OTAs do, and saying, okay, it's working well for these guys, let's try and emulate that and replicate it in terms of our own booking experience for our customers.
Okay, so in summary then, what would you say are the key takeaways from your presentation? What should Irish industry do next?
Yeah, I think, I suppose just to summarise, I mean, if we go back and just look over the last 20 minutes or so and say, well, okay, what is Brexit all about? And certainly the driving force behind it was, I suppose, the UK's desire to give priority to immigration independence and their sovereignty as such. And certainly from a EU perspective, their objective is to preserve the rules around their single market, and I suppose they also want to send out a clear message to the rest of Europe and say, leaving the EU is not going to be an easy thing by any means, and there's a clear risk of a hard Brexit, and I guess we're all a little bit unsure as to what that means and how it will work in practice. And I guess if there is a hard Brexit, the UK will leave the EU in every sense, both from a customs and single market perspective. From a hotel perspective, from an industry perspective, the weakening, the fluctuation in sterling has an immediate impact. The weakening of the UK economy may well have a further impact, and again, it would be most immediately felt in Northern Ireland, but certainly Ireland will feel it for sure. And I suppose the challenge on a national level that we face is around just the perceived value of Ireland as a destination, and it's something that we have to be very cognizant of. And I guess if you go back, say 2007, 2008, when Ireland was at the peak of the boom, and when we pretty much had priced ourselves out of everything, not just from a tourist perspective, and really it has to go back to, let's say, the basics of running a business, and what Fáilte Ireland we're mentioning in terms of, you've got to get the basics right, look after your business, look after your customer, try and maintain value in your business as much as you possibly can, look after your core business. But certainly it highlights the need to diversify as best you can. And I suppose just to sign off, I suppose the final point would be is definitely, let's say, don't panic. I mean, I would say, we have to take Brexit seriously, but certainly not to panic. I mean, we've had lots of swings, ups and downs. Let's say sterling swings, economic swings. We're well equipped to deal with it. But I think that the key thing is to be proactive with it and not to bury our heads in the sand around it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed, William.
You're very
That was an excellent presentation. I hope that everybody's taken some really good points there. We look forward to having this uploaded onto the website very shortly. So once again, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
for your
Stephen.
time.
Thank you.